She woke up in a penthouse that cost more than her entire life. The last thing she remembered was walking to her car. The first thing she saw was him, standing at the floor-to-ceiling window, silhouetted against the city lights, a gun resting on the table beside a single red rose. "You're safe," he said, without turning around. For now. Mara Vasquez had a rule: never ask questions you don't want answered. For 26 years, she followed that rule perfectly. She worked as a forensic accountant at a downtown firm, lived in a sensible apartment, drove a sensible car, and dated sensible men who bored her senseless. She was the kind of woman who color-coded her files, watered her plants on Sundays, and went to bed at 10:30 with a true crime podcast playing softly in the background. Ironic, considering what was coming. It started with an audit. A routine assignment: trace irregularities in a shell company called Voss Meridian Holdings. Her supervisor handed her the file on a Thursday morning with a coffee-stained sticky note that said, "Should be straightforward." It was anything but. By Friday evening, Mara had uncovered 3 layers of ghost accounts, 2 illegal wire transfers totaling $47 million, and a name that appeared 11 times across documents that weren't supposed to exist. Dante Ricci. She'd heard the name before. Everyone in the city had. He was the kind of rumor that lived in the spaces between newspaper headlines and police reports that got quietly buried. The heir to a criminal empire that spanned 3 continents. The man who allegedly owned half the judges in the state and personally knew the other half. She should have closed the file. Gone home. Ordered takeout. Instead, Mara photographed every single document. She was reaching for her coat when the office lights went out. All of them. At once. And from the darkness at the end of the hallway came the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps. She didn't remember screaming. She didn't remember running. What she remembered, would always remember, was the hand that closed around her wrist in the parking garage, firm but somehow not violent, and the voice that said, quietly and with absolute authority, "Don't fight me. The men behind you are not mine." She turned. And for the first time, she saw Dante Ricci. He was not what she expected. She'd built a monster in her head over 24 hours of digging through his sins on paper. She expected cold eyes, a cruel mouth, the face of someone who had forgotten what mercy looked like. What she got was worse. He was breathtaking. Tall, dark-suited, with sharp features that looked carved rather than born, and eyes so dark they absorbed the light around them. There was something dangerous in his stillness, the way a storm is dangerous before it moves. "Who are you?" she whispered. His jaw tightened. "The man keeping you alive tonight." The penthouse was on the 43rd floor. Mara counted the elevator numbers rising like a countdown. Or a sentence. She'd expected chains. A dark room. The clichés of fear. Instead, she got floor-to-ceiling views of a glittering city, a wardrobe of women's clothing in her exact size, which terrified her more than handcuffs would have, and a housekeeper named Rosa who brought her chamomile tea and looked at Dante like a grandmother looks at a difficult but beloved grandson. "You had my size on file," Mara said flatly, sitting at the edge of the enormous bed. Dante stood in the doorway, jacket removed now, sleeves rolled to the forearms. She noticed a scar running along his left hand. She noticed she was noticing. "I had your whole life on file," he said. "Before tonight." "That's not comforting." "It's not meant to be." She held his gaze. She'd always been told she had too much nerve for her own good. "Then why am I here? Why not just let them take me?" Something moved behind his eyes. Something brief and complicated and quickly shuddered. "Because of whose daughter you are," he said. And then he left. Closed the door. Left her sitting with those 6 words detonating slowly in her chest. Whose daughter you are. She didn't sleep that night. By morning, she'd tried the windows sealed. The doors alarmed. The Wi-Fi blocked. But she was fed, unchained, and unharmed, which in the landscape of her new reality felt like a strange gift. Dante returned at 7 with coffee and a folder. "Open it," he said. She did. Inside was a photograph of her father. Her father, Eduardo Vasquez, respected city councilman, cancer survivor, the man who taught her to ride a bike and cried at her college graduation, was shaking hands with a man she recognized from the wire transfers. A man named Gregor Voss. The man who ran Voss Meridian Holdings. The man whose money she'd been tracing. "No," she said. The word came out like a reflex. "The firm you work for was hired specifically to find those documents," Dante said, his voice careful and even. "Not to report them. To destroy them. And you. My father would never. Your father has been laundering money for the Voss Syndicate for 9 years. He sat across from her. His eyes didn't flinch. "He's not a good man, Mara." "I'm sorry." "And you are," she snapped. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. "No," he said finally. "I'm not." Days passed. 1, then 3, then 7. The penthouse began to feel less like a cage and more like a strange, suspended world. Mara learned Dante's rhythms the way you learn weather patterns, useful, necessary, a matter of survival. He woke before dawn. He took his coffee black and didn't speak until the second cup. He made phone calls in Italian and Sicilian that she wasn't meant to understand, but she'd spent a semester abroad in Florence and caught more than he knew. Words like guerra, war. Tradimento, betrayal. La ragazza, the girl. She was the girl. She was also, apparently, leverage. "Voss wants the documents back," Dante explained on the 8th day, spreading a map across the dining table. "More importantly, he wants no witnesses." "And what do you want?" Mara asked. He looked at the map. "Voss took something from me. 10 years ago. He used your father to do it." "What did he take?" A pause. "My brother." It was the first human thing he'd said in 8 days. And it cracked something open in the air between them. She sat down across from him. "Tell me." He didn't, not that day. But the wall between them shifted. Slightly. The way continental plates shift before an earthquake. Slow. Inevitable. The tension that built between them was the worst kind, the kind that neither of them named, because naming it would make it real and real things could be destroyed. She started joining him for dinner. He started explaining things instead of commanding them. Their arguments, and there were many, loud and sharp and honest, became something she looked forward to in a way she was ashamed to admit. He was arrogant, controlled, and occasionally ruthless. He was also the only person who'd ever looked at her like she was a problem worth solving rather than a person worth managing. "You should be afraid of me," he said one night, and it almost sounded like a warning to himself. "I know what you are," Mara said. "Then why aren't you?" She met his eyes. "Because whatever you are, you haven't lied to me once." On the 12th night, she found the second file. She hadn't been snooping, not exactly. Rosa had sent her to Dante's study for a phone charger, and the drawer was already open, the folder already visible, as though it had been left there waiting. Inside, her own photograph. Her name. Her apartment address. And a contract. A contract between Dante Ricci and Gregor Voss, dated 18 months ago. Her name was at the bottom, listed under an asset column. The agreement was a trade. Voss would hand over the evidence that cleared Dante's family name in a decade-old criminal case. In return, Dante would deliver Mara Vasquez and the documents to Voss directly. She had been the plan all along. She was standing at the penthouse door with her shoes on when he walked in. He saw the folder in her hands. His face didn't change, but something behind it did. "Mara. Don't." Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that, even as her chest split open. How long? How long was I just a transaction? That contract is 18 months old. How long, Dante? Everything changed. When? She slammed the folder down. When did it change? When it was convenient? When you'd already kept me here long enough that I started trusting you? Started, she stopped herself. I want to leave. He crossed the room in 4 steps and stood before her, not blocking her, but close. Close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the thing he was struggling to keep locked behind his eyes. If you walk out that door, he said quietly, Voss has 3 men in the lobby. I've been holding them back. The moment I stop. Maybe I'd rather take my chances. You wouldn't. You don't know me. I know you better than anyone ever has. His voice dropped to something rough and low. And that terrifies me more than Voss ever could. The silence between them was unbearable. The contract, he said. I tore it up 6 days after you got here. She didn't leave. She hated herself for it. She also knew, with the same analytical certainty that made her good at her job, that he was telling the truth. She'd become very good at reading the architecture of his lies. There weren't many. 2 days later, the walls of the penthouse came down, literally. Voss had grown impatient. A breach team moved on the building at 2 a.m., 6 men, military grade, moving fast. Dante's security held the elevator but not the stairs. Stay behind me, Dante told her, pressing a phone into her hands. 1 number saved. You call it if I go down. You're not going down. Mara. You're not. He looked at her for 1 long, devastating second. Then he cupped her face in both his scarred hands and pressed his forehead to hers, nothing more, just that, and the world compressed down to that single point of contact. Call the number, he said. If you have to. What followed was chaos and darkness and the specific terror of watching someone you care about fight for both your lives simultaneously. She stayed low, stayed behind cover, clutched the phone and refused to use it with a stubbornness that was entirely irrational and entirely her. When the last man went down and Dante turned to her in the smoke-filled stairwell, bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow, jacket destroyed, breathing hard, she crossed the space between them and grabbed him by the lapels. And she kissed him like an argument. Like a verdict. He kissed her back like a confession. In the aftermath, when the city police, the ones Dante actually owned, had cleared the building, he sat beside her on the penthouse couch with a wrapped cut on his forehead and a glass of whiskey and said, There's something I haven't told you about your father. She waited. Eduardo Vasquez wasn't laundering money for Voss. She stared at him. But the photographs were staged. Dante set down the glass. Your father has been feeding information about Voss's operation to federal investigators for 2 years. He's a cooperating witness. The money trail, the shell companies, he built them deliberately, to be found. He needed an auditor who was clean, brilliant, and had no idea what they were carrying. Mara felt the room tilt. He used me, she whispered. He protected you, the only way he knew how. By keeping you ignorant. Dante looked at her steadily. The night Voss's men came for you in the parking garage, your father had already called me. He knew I was the only one with enough reach to keep you out of Voss's hands. My father called you. She said it slowly, processing each word. You knew each other. We have an understanding. Have had, for 3 years. What kind of understanding? His jaw shifted. The kind that exists between 2 men who both lost someone to Gregor Voss. She called her father at dawn. He answered on the first ring. Like he'd been waiting. Mija, he said, and the single word carried 10,000 apologies. They talked for 2 hours. She cried once, ugly, gasping, cathartic. He cried twice and didn't try to hide it. By the end, she understood everything, and understanding it was both better and worse than the uncertainty had been. Before she hung up, he said, "Is he good to you? Richie?" She looked at Dante across the room, standing at the window in the early morning light, coffee in hand, watching over a city he ruled with methods she hadn't yet decided how to reconcile, and eyes she was starting to believe she already knew by heart. "He's honest with me," she said carefully. Her father was quiet for a moment. For a man like him, that's everything. 3 weeks later, Gregor Voss was arrested. Federal case, 43 charges, evidence assembled over 2 years of dangerous, meticulous work by a city councilman and, quietly, the criminal empire that had positioned itself as his unlikely ally. The city exhaled. Dante stood in his penthouse with a single opened envelope in his hand. He'd been staring at it for 10 minutes when Mara walked in from the kitchen with 2 coffees, a domestic routine that had snuck up on both of them without announcement. She looked at his face. "What is it?" He handed her the envelope without speaking. Inside was a photograph. A man she didn't recognize, with a face that looked remarkably, hauntingly like Dante's. Dark eyes. Sharp jaw. Older, harder, alive. On the back, 3 words written in an unfamiliar hand. "He's still breathing." Mara looked up. Dante's expression was something she had never seen on him before. Not rage. Not calculation. Hope. Raw and terrible and dangerous. "Your brother," she said. "Voss didn't kill him." His voice was barely above a whisper. "He sold him." The city lights pulsed below them, indifferent and glittering. Mara set down both coffees and took his hand, the scarred one, and held it in both of hers. "Then we go find him," she said simply. Dante looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd walked into his life as leverage and somehow, catastrophically, become the only person he'd ever trusted entirely. "You'd do that?" She raised an eyebrow. "Did you just ask me if I want to go on a dangerous international rescue mission with a mafia boss?" The corner of his mouth curved. The first real smile she'd ever seen on him. It was devastating. "Yes. Dante," she said, squeezing his hand. "I'm an accountant. I've been bored my entire life." The city hummed 43 floors below. Somewhere out there, a man with Dante Ricci's eyes was alive and waiting to be found. And somewhere in the distance, someone else was watching the penthouse window, someone who had sent that photograph for reasons that had nothing to do with mercy, and everything to do with what came next.
If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, comment and subscribe for more stories.